Hello and welcome to the Overlanding podcast, the original podcast dedicated to vehicle-dependent travel. I'm your host Andy Smith, and throughout the series I'll be chatting with adventurous people who have chosen to travel the world by bicycle, motorcycle, car and truck. The aim of the podcast is to discover what motivates people to embark on life-changing journeys and hear some incredible stories along the way. British-born Nevil Stow now resides in Alberta, Canada. He's a self-proclaimed motorbike nut and certainly loves an adventure. In 2009, he had a stroke which affected all sensation down his left side and saw him hospitalised. This humbling experience was enough to kickstart his passion for motorcycle travel, and before long he was back on the road. His fervour for overland travel has led to the inception of the 9 Minute Moto Film Festival. Enjoy. Hi, Neville. Thank you for joining me around the virtual campfire.
Oh, hi, Andy. It's good to be here.
We haven't had any bikers on the podcast for a couple of weeks. We've had a lot of cyclists recently and a lot of 4x4 owners, and we haven't had too many motorbikers recently. So I'd just like to welcome you to the show.
Oh, thanks very much.
Okay, I guess the best place to start would be like typically right at the beginning. I was kind of having a look through your website and discovered that you obviously now live in Canada, but with that accent you're not Canadian, are you?
No, originally I'm from South Devon. Actually, I was actually born in Buckinghamshire, but moved to South Devon when I was a young lad, and really consider that as my home from where I sort of grew up, basically. And sort of come from a motorcycling family, really. It's been a long background of grandfathers and fathers and cousins and brothers all being motorcyclists as well. I had no chance of getting away from it, really.
Yeah. So when did you get your first bike then? When you were just a teenager, or?
Before that, actually, when I was still in Buckinghamshire, we had. I remember my older brother Andy he showed up at our house when I was a kid, and I was literally just a knee high to a grasshopper, probably about 5 or 6 years old. And I remember staring up at this motorcycle that he had, and it was this big shiny thing, and it was just gorgeous. And I think it was the old 750 Kawasaki, actually, and. This thing was. I just fell in love with it. It looked enormous as well, and within a few weeks, my parents. He'd been training to become a mechanic, so he put something together in a workshop and showed up with basically a skeleton framed motorcycle that had an engine in it and had running boards. It was actually a scooter, I think, at the time. I could hop on the running boards and ride this thing around the fields in Stow in Buckinghamshire. So that was my first memory of not ever having to pedal.
So how did that then manifest itself into them becoming an overlander? Did you have a passion for travel, or had you travelled a lot when you were younger?
I did. My parents were always going into Europe. They were always taking us on holiday, and my mum always instilled in me the fact that the real university of life is out there to be seen if you travel, if you meet other cultures and other people. And so that's always been there, thanks to Mum, basically. She always brought me up to understand that, nobody's really better than anybody else. Nobody's really. It's just a fascination for their cultures.
So at what point did you do your first motorcycle trip? Did you tour around Europe by motorcycle then?
Well, that sort of grew up. That we sort of fast forward a little bit to Devon now, and all of the lads that I was at school with, who are still dear friends. We're all friends on Facebook now as well, and we've obviously got families and that sort of thing. But back in those days, we were all just learning to ride motorcycles, and obviously crashing them, hurting ourselves, and nothing's really changed there. So I'm still crashing them. I crashed on the ice about 2 weeks ago, actually, and separated my shoulder. But the the love of it was really from. It was really the guys that I was at school with. We were always hiking on Dartmoor, and we were always camping. We were always getting backpacks and going out and doing what we could. There's hardly a weekend that ever went by when we weren't camping up on Dartmoor in all kinds of weather every month of the year. And that the love of that then sort of manifested itself towards motorcycles, and then the revelation one day was that I can actually take my backpack on a motorcycle, and that was really when the penny dropped. And so we were originally just doing trips on our sort of 550s. We were strapping our backpacks onto our bikes and going up to North Wales and up to Scotland, and then catching a ferry over to France, and suddenly became very aware of the fact that we could just go wherever we wanted to on these two wheels.
Yeah. From that point, then, how did you end up in Canada, and how did you then kind of manifest? How did it essentially turn into a bigger trip then? Because I'm quite aware that you've done some quite interesting longer trips.
Yes, again, that's through a passion for feeding or meeting my fellow human beings. Really, it started off as I got fed up with just the daily drudgery of having to go to work, even at such a young age in my early 20s. I thought there must be something else. So I just quit my job one day and bought a one-way ticket to a one-way flight to Boston. Actually, this was back in the early 80s, and stuck my thumb out, and I actually hitchhiked for a year. I got tired of that hitchhiking eventually, and went back to what I knew best, which was I bought a used Goldwing in California, and then carried on traveling around North America for as long as I could until my money ran out, and came back home in early '87.
And so you settled in Canada then, or you came back later?
I came back later.
Okay, so you came back to England after that trip.
Settled in England and had got married, and started to raise the family. And then again, it was this wanderlust. There's got to be something better than just, for me anyway, just getting up, going to work. I was riding to work into Plymouth every day in the pouring rain, and you do it because it's necessary, right? You do it because you have to pay a mortgage. You have to pay, you've got responsibilities as a husband and a father. But we wanted something different, so we wanted to actually experience life somewhere else. So Michelle and I eventually, this was after a lengthy conversation with a friend of mine about being taxed to death at the time. It just seemed that that's what was happening to me. We decided we would emigrate, and one of the countries that would accept me on the sort of qualifications I had was Canada, and it really was a case of throwing a dart at the map almost in Canada. I did have a friend over here who was a climber. We were both rock climbing in Devon together, and he'd already gone into Ontario to actually to do work, and he wound up moving out in Western Canada. So we wound up staying with Russell for Russell and Deb actually for probably about 3 months before we got our feet on the ground in Canada and we were able to find our own apartment.
Yeah. Your love of motorcycles then, did you take a bike with you? Did you ship one across, or did you just buy new motorcycles over there?
Sadly, I had to sell all my bikes in the UK.
Oh dear.
Yeah, I know. And I went for probably about 4 years over here with no motorcycle. But I knew I'd always return to it. They've been with me all my life. So eventually I returned. I actually bought a Goldwing over here. It'd been wrecked. Believe it or not, the guy had fallen asleep behind the handlebars on the highway. It badly damaged the bike, and I thought I could rebuild it, so I bought it off him. He was okay, by the way, folks. This guy only broke his little finger coming off. He actually hit the central barrier, and thankfully this guy had really not hurt himself very much at all. He just broke his little finger. But I bought the bike, rebuilt it, and ran it around here. And obviously, we were getting our feet on the ground over here now, so we had a new mortgage, we had new responsibilities, and that kind of thing. So eventually, the motorcycle collection just got bigger and bigger and bigger, I suppose.
To skip forward then a little, your first kind of overland trip over in Canada, that was in 2010, right? But there was an event that triggered that. If we could talk about that a little, I was reading on your website that you suffered a stroke in 2009. Did that have a kind of profound effect then on your life?
Absolutely. At the age of 45, I was working my backside off again. So I'm one of those people. I suppose you can call it workaholic, and I'm not proud of that, actually. But at the time, yes, I was doing everything wrong. My diet was wrong. Everything. I wasn't handling stress very well, and I wound up in my job. I wound up having a stroke. It left me with. At the time, I'd lost all sensation in the left-hand side of my body. I still had full movement. I still had sensation. Oh no, I had no sensation. Sorry, I had full movement, and it wasn't a typical type stroke, but it was actually a stroke. It wasn't a TIA or trans-ischemic attack. It was actually a proper stroke. I was in hospital for a week, and that's not a pleasant thing because you think, well, am I ever going to be able to walk out of here? Or am I going to be in a wheelchair? What's going to happen? So a lot of things go through your head, and I think it sounds a little extreme, but I think as human beings, every once in a while, we need to be humbled. And I was humbled by this event, and that really put me in tune with wanting to do the things that I want to do. It was time to not quit everything, not relax, but was to actually refocus on the things that I wanted to do, because time is marching on, and we only get one shot at this lifetime. We don't think we do, but we do.
So not long after your stroke, then you kind of embarked on a trip, didn't you, up through Canada and up into Alaska?
Yeah, I wanted to give back to the Heart and Stroke Foundation, and the only way I knew how to do this was to raise money for these people. Was to go and do a motorcycle trip, and that was one of the promises that I'd made myself. Was if you're going to do something big, I always urge people to try and tie it in with a charity of your choice. Even if you only raise a few pounds or a few dollars, it doesn't matter. It's gone in the right direction. If you've done your homework and if it's a good reputable charity, it should take no effort at all to just tie yourself in and say, "Hey, I'm going to go and do this run or this cycle or this life-changing event, and I want to earn a little bit of money for your charity." So I thought, and I always promised myself that if they fixed me up properly and I was able to get back on a motorcycle and ride it, then I was going to go up to the Arctic Circle. I was going to go up to Inuvik in Canada, up the Dempster Highway, which I'd always wanted to do, and also go up through Alaska up the Dalton and get up to Prudhoe Bay. So that's actually what I did inside of a month-long period in the summer of 2010. Only about 7 months after I'd had a stroke.
Yeah, and how did the stroke affect your health? Then it was, I presume, you made a pretty full recovery, and because obviously you're riding a motorbike, you're using both left and right hand and left and right feet. Did you encounter any problems?
Well, at the time in 2010, I still didn't have the sensation in my left foot. It was still completely numb. It felt like somebody else's foot.
That must have been trouble changing gear.
I soon learned to control the bike as best as I could, but eventually, later in 2010, after I'd done that one trip, I actually remember being sat on the couch, and I was barefoot, and I looked at Michelle and I said, "Wow!" I said, "I can actually feel the carpet." And all of a sudden, for whatever reason, I actually had sensation back in my left foot. So now I am 100% back together again. It's yeah.
And during that trip, were you camping, and did did you go on your own on that trip? Were you riding with anyone else?
No, I went with a good friend, Adam. He wanted to. I didn't even know Adam was into motorcycles, actually, and we met up on Facebook. And he's one of the first Canadians that I'd met, actually, when I first moved over to this country, through my climbing partner, Russell. And Adam's a very avid mountaineer, runner, a cyclist, very fit guy, and I'd never thought he was into bikes. And he stepped forward and said, well, I'd like to go with you. And he was on a KLR 650, and so we rode together up to Alaska and up to the Yukon, and it was a great time. We were camping the whole way. I think there was the occasional motel night where that's the inevitable when you're either on a bicycle or a motorcycle. If you had a long, hard, wet day, then occasionally you're going to want to book yourself into somewhere nice and warm and dry.
So that trip, did that kind of reignite your travel for passion, and were you becoming aware that it was something you had missed from your childhood, and did you make that connection back to your kind of when you were younger?
Absolutely. I think more than anything else, it was a revelation that we, as I said before, we only get one shot. This isn't a practice run. I'm at 53 years old. I'm very aware of the fact that I'm now probably over halfway through my life, and there's so many things and so many people to meet and so many things to do. So yes, I wanted to bring the whole idea of travel back into my life, and I've done, or I'm still doing the responsible thing. I'm still being dad, and I'm still looking after the mortgage. I'm still working, so I have a full-time job. But I really wanted to have more time in my life to go out and see stuff as well. And it's very difficult because in the Western world especially, we are so tied up with our jobs and our lifestyles that we don't make enough time to do the things that we want to do. Now, it doesn't matter if it's travel or not. You could be into tennis, for example. You just need to be able to cut that time out and do it.
So you obviously had a strong urge then to do this again, and having said that you're working and paying the mortgage and doing all the other things that you have to do to get through life, how did you then put yourself in a position to undertake your next trip? Because that trip was much longer.
That was thankfully due to a recession. The crash of 2008 that we basically experienced right the way around the Western world was directly impacting me, for want of a better word. For the company I was working for, I'm in construction in Canada, and of course house sales started to slump, and people weren't buying. And my company, we had a meeting one day, and my company said, we're going to hang on to all you guys, so as many as we can. But if somebody wants to take some time off, whilst we're in this slump, then please do so, and you can come back to your job. So I put my hand up and I said, I think I'm going to take 5 months off and go and ride a motorcycle around the world. Just do a lap of the earth if possible.
And having looked at your website and kind of looked at the route, and certainly looking at the terminology you used, you said you travelled the long way round. I presume you were fully aware of Ewan and Charlie's kind of motorcycle adventures at that point then, and were they some kind of inspiration?
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's that whole series that they did was wonderful to see. It was actually there's a few people that I sort of related to in that as well. In Plymouth, I was sort of close to a lot of the dirt bike racers that were down there. So we used to have John Deacon, for example. He was an enduro champion who went on to do the Dakar, and we were there. Me and my buddy Martin Marsh, or Swampy. We were all sort of instrumental in helping or egging him on, basically. Actually, yeah. So John Deacon went on to actually have the off-road training establishment with Simon Pavey. So we there's a lot of stuff I could relate to, and I sat there and I went, well, it was a well put together TV show. Now it's been there's a lot of purists out there that basically they can, people like to slam stuff. From my point of view, that was wonderful. It put people it put members of the general public who knew nothing about motorcycles. They just think that we are people that maybe have beer guts, tattoos, and ride great big loud motorcycles. It put them into tune with the fact that there's a whole different sect of people out there that actually are interested in going out and travelling, and this is their chosen mode of travel. And so you'll get people who have never ridden a motorcycle before in their life. They'll come to you and they'll see you parked up on the street, and they'll say, "Hi, have you ever seen that TV show with those two guys that did?" And you say, "Yeah, the long way around," and they got to see it. They got to experience or live vicariously through that show. I think that was marvellous.
Yeah, and it was something that actually got me into overlanding, although I'm typically a four-wheel overlander, but it's certainly that kind of experience and that sense of adventure was something that inspired me to travel the way that we do. And I think it had a huge effect on a whole generation of people, really. And yes, you're totally correct that a lot of people like to knock it. But at the end of the day, do you know what I mean? Ewan McGregor was filming Star Wars. He's a huge Hollywood star. They're going to have support vehicles and backup and help and quite a tight schedule and all the other things that go with it. So
they need it. If you're going with a movie star, then insurance companies need a little bit of assurance that these people aren't going to be hurting themselves too much, because they've got various contracts they have to fulfill.
Yeah. And that trip then, so that was in 2013. Can you just talk me through your kind of route and that as a kind of adventure? You took a 650 on that trip, right?
Yes. I wanted simplicity in an engine. And that was born through talking with my older brother, Andy. We were going to do a trip together, actually. And it was originally, he was still living in Devon. I was living in Canada, and we were actually going to do a trip from his house to my house, basically. He'd seen what I'd done in 2010 on my other motorcycle and in going up to Alaska, and he wanted to do the same thing. So I said, well, why don't we go from your house to my house, or vice versa, my house to your house? Then we got talking, and we said, well, actually, if you think about that, if we riding from England across Russia to go to Canada, we might as well just keep on going. So the idea was born that we would actually go from Land's End in the UK, purely because it was so close to my brother's house, all the way to Cape Spear in Newfoundland, which is just across the pond. Then we fell out, basically. So I wound up doing the trip on well, it wasn't on my own, but it was actually with a guy called Ulf Muller.
So that particular trip, then, I presume you were planning that for some time before you left, and you did that in a 5-month period. Do you obviously, and understandably, you probably couldn't have taken much more time due to your work circumstances, but how did you find that for a time period for such a distance? Was it a strenuous task to complete it in 5 months?
It was, yes. I've never felt rushed before. In this case, I'd set out, and because I'd set up with a couple of sponsors who were interested in what I was doing. And because I was raising money again for the Heart and Stroke Foundation, I now had to fulfil an obligation. And this is one of the things. That's a whole different subject. Sponsorship is because you have an obligation. If you have sponsors, you have an obligation. You're not just getting free stuff. You need to be able to reciprocate. So. I had to complete this journey within 5 months, and it's doable. We actually rode right across what we wanted to do in about 3.5 months, actually. But saying that, I felt rushed because I didn't have time to actually visit areas where we could soak up more of the culture, more of the lifestyles that people were experiencing, more of the sights and the sounds. And so there were certain countries that I would happily go back and see them again.
Yeah. I'm just playing devil's advocate here because we obviously have listeners on 4 wheels and 2 wheels. Would you consider doing an overland trip in a 4-wheel drive vehicle?
Well, you see, what a lot of people don't realise is I'm actually a real Land Rover buff as well. I used to have a Series 3 long wheelbase back in the UK. So yeah, I would definitely consider it. I used to drive my long wheelbase up to Scotland before just to go on holiday. Had all my camping gear in there. It was all set up. I rebuilt the thing from the ground up. So yeah, I love the idea of that. I absolutely love the idea of it. So I first and foremost, I consider myself as a motorcyclist purely because they've been around all my life. That's my thing, and it's not. I have no preferences. The older I've got, more just riding the motorcycle itself is an adventure. I don't care what size the engine is. I don't care what it looks like. It's the joy of being on the 2 wheels. It could be a vintage bike. It can be anything. So first and foremost, I consider myself to be a motorcyclist. Secondly, I'm a traveller. It's someone who has this thirst for seeing other cultures, other lifestyles, other types of people. So I'm happy to do that in any way, shape, that I can. I'm actually considering a trip for 2019, where I'll probably be on a bicycle for the first part of the trip. So. Yeah, so I would like, I like the travelling, and I'll do it in any other way. But yeah, I would give my heart and soul to get my old Series 3 back.
Yeah. Those countries that you travelled through, is that the first time you'd been to many of those countries?
Yes, of course. As a kid growing up, we were always brought up to believe that, for example, Russia were the bad guys. They were behind the wall. They were communists. They were this, that, and the other. So it was wonderful. I remember actually being at the Le Mans 24-hour motorcycle racing back in the early '90s, when just after the wall had come down. The size of the crowd at Le Mans swelled to this massive amount of people that during that April. And there were people coming in from Czechoslovakia. There were people coming in from Russia, and people were just hugging each other. They were happy. They were happy to actually have this freedom, and it's the first time I'd ever experienced this. And again, that had come through the love of motorcycles, because we were going to see the 24-hour races, and that was when it suddenly realised that these people wanted to see what we lived like, and I really wanted to see how they lived. And so to go into somewhere like Russia and to actually spend a few months in Russia and try and learn to read the road signs. You got to get a lot of helmet time where you're not talking to people. So you got a lot of time where you can actually try and understand what some of the Russian writing says on their road signs. And eventually we actually were able to, by the time we got to the other side of Russia, we were able to read simple things like on menus, that sort of thing. It's quite interesting, but that's part of a self-growth, I think.
Yeah. And on that trip, were you primarily camping?
Actually, no. We started off with the intention of camping, but we soon learned that we could actually stay in cheap hotels, actually cheaper than we could if we were camping in Canada in the national parks. So it became a no-brainer. We could actually book ourselves into a cheap hotel almost every night, and it sort of, to begin with, it jarred me. I had this sort of purist attitude that I was just going to wild camp everywhere. Although, and you could save money, but I was in my 50s. I was 49 actually. I didn't need to live like that. I didn't need to rough it quite so much.
Yeah. And the bike, how did the bike perform on that particular trip?
Pretty much flawlessly. The only thing that failed on the bike was the regulator, which was actually an aftermarket part I put on. It was a heavy duty one, and it failed in the middle of Kazakhstan. But a few hours later, we had a new one, and that's still on the bike now. The 650, or Twiggy, she's called. The reason why I called her that was because she was very thin and spindly compared to all the big heavy bikes I've had before in the past. So I built that one. I literally took the engine apart on that at my friend's place down the road here in Bragg Creek Power Sports. John is an exceptional mechanic, and he's worked with a lot of world-class racers. He's actually English as well, and so there's lots of cups of tea and lots of sort of padding around his workshop down there.
Yeah.
His bike back together, and I didn't do anything really special to the bike. I gave it a long-range fuel tank, but I wanted the simplicity of a carbureted engine with a single cylinder, something that I could handle as a mechanic. I didn't need something that could be plugged in to a computer that I wasn't going to carry the diagnostic stuff with me. So this simple bike basically made it around the world and hardly missed a beat.
Yeah, very, very good. And I'm glad to hear that you name your motorcycle. Again, that's something that typically divides overlanders who, for example, our vehicle has a name and we're very much attached to it. But again, I think that's very funny.
I think all 6 motorcycles that we have in our garage now, they all have names. So.
Okay. That's very, very good. I do like naming a vehicle. I know it's just an inanimate object, a big lump of heavy metal, but I do think they have personalities of their own which need to be acknowledged with a name, I think.
They become family after a period of time. If you go overlanding, if you go and spend any time in or on a vehicle that is your daily mode of transportation and your home, and eventually that motorcycle becomes family, or that vehicle becomes family. I can't ever sell Twiggy. Can't do it.
I think it's interesting the kind of relationship you build with your vehicle, and it's actually it's something we've not actually talked about on the podcast at all, and we should. Because I think when people undertake journeys like this, they have such a massive emotional attachment to the vehicle because they've gone through so much together, and you're incredibly thankful for that vehicle, and sometimes you have a bad day with it, but it is, like you said, it is a member of the family ultimately at the end of the day.
It becomes part of the team, without a doubt.
Exactly, and probably the most important part of the team, because without it, you can't do what you do.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds amazing. And on that particular journey, other than the regulator problem, did you have any other problems?
No, not at all. I had a slightly loose wheel bearing near Khabarovsk in Russia. It took me 10 minutes to switch out, and that was it. The bike didn't miss a beat.
Yeah, very good. So just to jump forward then, and one of the other reasons why I really wanted to speak to you, you've recently set up a film festival, right? Yes,
I did. It's called the 9 Minute Moto Film Festival, and it was really born from the fact that when I got home, I was looking at all of my helmet cam footage that I took with a view to putting together maybe like a half-hour little film about my travels around, doing this lap of the Earth. I realised that I'm a terrible cameraman. I really am. And it suddenly dawned on me that so were some of my friends as well. We've been doing it all wrong. And because we were just filming, we just we just stick these things on our helmets or on our bikes, turn them on, and video an hour of the road coming towards you, in the vain hope that something interesting might happen. And that's suddenly this revelation that I could have gone away with a little bit of a storyboard or an idea, or filmed different angles, just to make this sort of this thing a little bit more exciting, a bit more interesting. And or I'd get called over to a friend's house where they'll say, "Hey, I had a great day yesterday. You want to see what I did on a motorcycle or on my mountain bike?" And you just see trees going by for 20 minutes. And it suddenly dawned on me, you're trying to be polite as well. You're looking at this thinking, yeah, it looks like you had a great time, but for me, you're almost asleep. So we decided we would lay the gauntlet down. But that was sort of, that was brought on by a friend of ours, Jim Smith, just down the road here. He's a gifted motorcycle rider and also a very keen mountain biker. And Jim invited us over to their house and said, look, you've got 15 minutes to give a slideshow on what you did this summer. And he said, we're going to invite all of these different families over. If you're on a mountain bike or on a motorcycle, then give us a slideshow. Or better still, if you've taken some helmet cam stuff, then entertain us. But he said, I'm going to pull you off the little stage at our house. He said after 15 minutes, and we put together 2 7-minute films. We basically sat on the computer and decided we were going to learn an editing software. We had no idea what we were going to do. This was me and my wife Michelle, and we put together a short film about her ride up to the Yukon. This was the first ever big long ride that she'd done, and so we put together this little film, and it suddenly dawned on us when we saw everybody's face at this sort of this. It wasn't a Christmas gathering, but it was close to sort of the end of the year. We saw people, the looks on their faces were like, wow, you can actually edit stuff and put it together. And that sort of gave us the idea of laying the gauntlet down to our friends and saying, put something together, put a short movie together, and we'll show it. We'll actually get a screen, we'll get a projector, and we'll show it. And by the way, don't make it very long. We were thinking maybe about 10 minutes long. And then it became a standing joke in my family that whenever I took my kids to cinema, I'd be asleep in the cinema within about 10 minutes because I just worked too hard. So we decided that my attention span was about 9 minutes long. So that's how the film festival started.
Yeah. I think it's great. I think the concept is really nice. I think 9 minutes is perfect. It's incredibly quirky, I think. And when I read the story you've just told on the website, actually I thought I could relate to it to some degree. I thought that was very funny. So that's happening in May this year.
Yes.
And is it open to anybody from anywhere?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
But if you're listening and you're out there and you want to submit a movie to our little film festival, if you go to 9mmff.com, there's a way of submitting your movie to us on there, and we respect we respect your work as well. We'll show it. We have a little awards night in May. It's kind of like our own little Oscars night, which is tonight, I believe, isn't it? Actually,
yeah.
And we sort of we enjoy seeing other people's work because it's being viewed by your peers.
It's perfect. It's a nice little incentive because I think. A lot of the time, people who document their overland trips want to make, products out of their overland trip to some degree, so they can share their story, whether it be a book or a film. And I think the kind of concept of a 9-minute film festival is perfect because it's not daunting. Do you know what I mean? People don't have to make a feature-length movie, and within that, I think it's going to encourage a lot of people to start making films.
And that was the idea. That really was the idea, Andy. It was the fact that there are probably thousands and tens and thousands of people out there that have used these helmet cams and the footage that they've taken is just sitting on their hard drives at home doing nothing. And we wanted to give everybody a chance to actually get out there and just learn even a simple editing software. But we didn't want people to go crazy. And I mean, don't get me wrong, you can do that if you want to. But we didn't want it to become a labour of love. We didn't want someone sitting there for 6 months trying to put together a 1.5 hour feature-length movie on what they did, because that would be that's full-time work.
Yeah.
What we wanted people to do is treat it more as a hobby, and we wanted them to actually learn their editing software, because in the future you might have some really good filmmakers come out of this, but more to the point is your grandkids are going to want to see what you did.
Yeah.
And so if you actually put it together in an interesting little movie of what you did at Overlanding, for example, they're going to be able to see where you went and what people were like. In this current climate, this current political climate that we have at the moment, there's a lot of mistrust, I think, and so for people to see what it was like to travel through, whichever country you were travelling through, how people lived then and that kind of stuff, what the cities were like back then, what the vehicles were like, what you had to do to actually keep them running. It's got a future historical significance.
Yeah. I think it's incredibly important to document your overland trips, and that is something that's cropped up quite a few times in previous podcasts. Great, that seems like a relevant place to stop. I will also put all the links on our website so that people can contact you and submit films. And I, for one, would be incredibly curious to see what's get submitted. Is there a plan to make the films available online at any point?
Actually, there is. We've got two very dear friends in Calgary, Issa and Nita Brabish. These guys are the ones that are really responsible for pushing me into making this 9-minute Moto Film Festival what it is. And really, they're 50% of the equation here. They're exceptionally good designers, and they design the website as well. They actually maintain it for me, because I'm hopeless. But I've got to meet up with those guys very soon. They're working hard, and we're working hard up here in Canmore, and we haven't had a chance to meet up here. So, but what we're going to do is soon we're discussing actually revamping the website slightly. We'll probably put links to, because we actually have a YouTube channel as well, but I haven't really spent much time playing around with that YouTube channel. So what I'm going to do is we'll put links on the website there to some of the best movies that we've had submitted, and obviously the winners from last year's festival as well. But because I don't know how to do that, I'm going to have to go and buy Issa and Nita a drink and see how we do. But those guys are incredible. They've been an absolute. They've been my rock all the way through this.
Yeah, very good. It's always nice to surround yourself by incredibly wonderful, friendly, techie people.
Yes, exactly. They really are. I'll come up with a crazy idea, and you can see them go. They'll look at me and they'll go, "Yeah, why do we do it this way?" And I'm like, "Oh, I never thought of it that way." So, yeah, I can put an engine together, but I'm just hopeless with electronics.
Perfect. I think most overlanding trips or generally start with a crazy idea, so that seems like a perfect place to stop. Perfect. No, well, thank you very much for your time. I've really enjoyed talking to you today.
Oh, it was great, Andy. Thanks you so much for contacting me. It's really great.
No problem. It's clear that Nevil's passion and love for motorcycle travel is all-consuming. To find out more about his adventures, check out all the links in the show notes over on our website, theoverlandingpodcast.com. You'll also find links to all our social media channels and bonus material relating to each podcast. If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, please let us know. You can also show your appreciation by subscribing and reviewing us on whatever platform you use. Writing us a review really does help boost our podcast up the listings, which in turn means these amazing stories will reach more people. If you're an overlander yourself and have an interesting story, we'd love to hear from you. We'd also like to hear from anybody who set out on a lengthy overland trip and then decided it wasn't for them. You can email us at aroundtheworldin800days@mail.com. Please like, share, bump and give us a thumbs up along the way. Many thanks for joining us around the virtual campfire. Join us again next week. That's it for now. Bye.